The wind came down the mountain like a judgment. It howled through the narrow canyons of Taos, like it carried the voices of those who'd lived and died before rattling the window panes in Thomas Tenorio's one-bedroom adobe rental and making the walls groan. At 5:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, the sky outside was a sheet of ash, and the snow was falling so hard it looked like smoke. Inside, the space heater sputtered and coughed. The old thing wheezed like it had one lung left, and Thomas knew it might not survive another hour. He stood in the kitchen, staring at a stack of envelopes arranged in neat, merciless order on the counter. Red letters, due dates, shut-off warnings. The electric bill had passed 2 extensions. The propane tank was nearly dry. His truck was 2 payments behind, and the shop in Santa Fe hadn't called him back in over a month. They'd said they'd have more work before the holidays. They hadn't. The coffee pot hissed out its final breath, and Thomas poured the last of the grounds into a chipped mug that read Ace Hardware Taos in faded green letters. He cupped the heat with both hands, trying to chase the numb from his fingers. He hadn't slept. His body was tired, but his mind had kept circling back to the same dead end. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked in a long time. Naya's stocking hung over the cold fireplace empty. He closed his eyes. She's only 8. She doesn't need to know yet how much it hurts to want and come up empty. The bedroom door creaked open behind him, followed by soft footsteps padding across the tile. He turned to see Naya bundled in an oversized sweatshirt and dragging her stuffed rabbit cloud. Her thick black hair stuck out in every direction, eyes wide and hopeful. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she whispered, her voice still raspy with sleep. He crouched to her level and opened his arms. She walked into them without hesitation. "Merry Christmas, mija." Naya looked around the small kitchen like she was searching for something. "Is Santa still coming, even if we don't have a chimney?" Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We don't need a chimney. We've got prayers, and that's better." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're not poor Naya. We're just between blessings." That's what his grandfather used to say back before the old man passed, before everything got harder. Before nights like this one became the norm. Back when Thomas still believed blessings came to those who earned them. "Do we get to open presents now?" she asked, peering toward the living room where a little cedar sapling stood propped in a bucket of dirt dressed in old corn husk ornaments and a string of popcorn. "Let's do hot chocolate first," he said. "Then we'll see what the jolly man brought." She nodded solemnly and climbed into her chair, clutching Cloud to her chest. Thomas reached into the cupboard, pulled down the can of cocoa, and set the milk on the stove. As he stirred, his phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Christmas Day was a favorite for scammers and debt collectors, but something in him told him to answer. He pressed the green button. "Hello," a woman's voice, crisp and efficient. "Mr. Tenorio, this is Patty Homewood from Rio Grande County Land Services. I apologize for the early call, but due to weather and staffing shortages, today's property auction is moving to phone format. I have your name down as a potential bidder for parcel 785, also known as Whitfield Lodge." Thomas blinked. "That was 3 weeks ago. I didn't think the auction was still happening. It's still on. We had a cancellation from our on-site auctioneer and are proceeding via remote bidding. It starts at 8 sharp. I'm just confirming you're still interested." He hesitated. The lodge. His grandfather had told stories about that place. An old stone and timber mansion built high up where the forest thinned. It had been abandoned since the 70s, forgotten and swallowed by the mountain. His grandpa used to say it was haunted not by ghosts but by secrets. I I was just curious about it, Thomas admitted. Didn't think I'd actually have a chance. You might be the only bidder, Patty said. It's Christmas morning. Minimum is 500. Property is as is. No inspections. 12.5 acres large structure. Probably condemned. He stared down at the mug in his hands, then at Naya, who had taken to tracing patterns in the frost on the window. I'll take the call, Thomas said before he could stop himself. Great. Expect a call from this number at 8. She hung up. What am I doing, he thought. That $500 was the last of his savings. He'd been stretching it for groceries, fuel, snow tires he still hadn't bought. It was everything. But something about the lodge wouldn't let go. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. That Whitfield place wasn't just a house. It was a mistake built out of timber and ego. But the bones of it, the bones were sound. He poured the cocoa and set Naya's mug in front of her. She beamed. Dad, did you know Cloud wants to live in a castle? She said between sips. Yeah, he asked, still lost in his head. Yeah, a big one, with stone walls and a fireplace taller than you. He looked up sharply. Taller than me, huh? She nodded. And big windows so you can see the snow falling. Thomas stared at her, then out the window to the gray sky, then at the clock. 7:59. The phone rang. He picked it up with hands that felt carved from ice. Do we have any opening bids for parcel 7885? Patty's voice came through. Silence. Going once. Thomas swallowed. 500, he said quietly. We have $500 from bidder 1. Do we have $525? Silence again. It stretched out so long he thought the call had dropped. Going once, going twice, sold. Mr. Tenorio, congratulations. You are now the provisional owner of Whitfield Lodge. Please be aware the total back taxes due within 30 days are $8,416. Failure to pay will void the sale. He stared blankly. The floor under him didn't feel real. I understand. Have a Merry Christmas. The call ended. He dropped the phone onto the counter and slid to the floor, back pressed against the cold wall. Dad, Naya said, her voice uncertain. He looked up at her, heart thudding in his chest. I might have done something a little crazy, he said. Her eyes widened. What kind of crazy? The kind where we own a lodge up in the mountains now. Naya gasped and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. A castle may be exactly that. She squealed, and in her joy, Thomas found something solid again. If he was going to lose everything in 30 days, he might as well see what he'd just bought. He stood, kissed her forehead, and said, Get your coat, mija. We're going exploring. The lodge rose from the snow like it had been waiting for us, waiting for someone with hands honest enough to open it. Tomas kept both hands tight on the steering wheel as the truck crawled its way up the forgotten road tires, grinding through drifts that reached the bumpers. The forest around them had gone quiet, except for the engine's slow growl, as if even the trees were holding their breath. Heavy snow still fell, clinging to the branches like thick wool, narrowing the already treacherous path. In the passenger seat, Naya pressed her forehead to the window, breath fogging the glass. Are we almost there? She asked. I think so, Thomas said. If the map was right. He'd printed out the original parcel records that morning after calling Lita for directions to the old access road. The lodge sat somewhere near a decommissioned logging trail above Valecito Bozan private land, once surrounded by national forest now. No road signs, no trail markers, just snow and trees stretching endlessly in every direction. He glanced down at the odometer and then back at the path. Another quarter mile. His fingers were numb despite the heater blasting as best it could. The truck creaked with each slow turn of the wheels, suspension aching against the climb. I thought castles had stone bridges, Naya said suddenly. And horses. Thomas smiled faintly. This one probably has creaky stairs and raccoons, she giggled. Even better. The road cut sharply to the right around a cluster of boulders and then opened abruptly into a wide clearing. The truck coasted to a stop, tires crunching in the silence. Tomas stared. There it was. Whitfield Lodge stood at the far end of the snowy expanse. Its roof sloped steeply under the weight of winter-tall stone chimneys stretching toward a steel-gray sky. The building looked like it had grown from the earth-riverstone foundation, peeled timber beams, and windows 3 stories high. A massive porch wrapped the front like a wooden belt, its support columns thick as trees. Most of the glass panes remained intact, catching the falling snow like a kaleidoscope. It didn't look abandoned. It looked like a sleeping bear. Naya's voice was hushed. It really is a castle. Thomas nodded slowly, hand tightening on the gear shift. Let's go meet it. He parked near what might once have been a circular drive now buried beneath a foot of untouched snow. The only sound was the wind whispering through the trees and the soft crackle of cooling metal as the truck settled. They stepped out together, boots sinking deep. Thomas pulled Naya's scarf tighter and double-checked the emergency pack in the bed tools. Flashlights, bottled water, propane stove blankets. He didn't trust to place this remote not to surprise him. Stay close, he said. Naya grabbed his gloved hand, always. They crunched toward the lodge, snowflakes catching in Naya's dark hair like tiny stars. At the top of the porch steps, Thomas reached for the front door, an enormous plank of darkened oak with an iron elk head handle. It was locked, of course. He tested the frame. Solid. No give. Even the hinges looked stubborn. I'll find another way in, he said. Stay here. I'm not staying out here by myself, she argued. There could be wolves. Wolves don't knock, Thomas replied, though he took her with him anyway. They circled the lodge slowly, boots scraping across the wood. Around the back, a window was slightly ajar, swollen with time, but not frozen shut. Thomas wedged it open with his crowbar and climbed through first landing in what appeared to be a study bookshelves, lining the walls, dust thick enough to muffle his footsteps. He unlocked the door and let Naya inside. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide, cheeks pink from the cold. It smells like old paper and firewood, she whispered. Thomas swept the beam of his flashlight across the room. Everything was still there. A leather armchair, a rusted wood stove, rolled maps in a wire rack. Dust draped everything like a funeral shroud. He walked slowly into the hallway, then the great room where the ceiling soared high above. And that was when he saw it, the fireplace. It dominated the far wall, rising 20 feet tall, built from riverstone, smoothed by time. The hearth opening was large enough for a grown man to sit inside. The mantel above it was a single polished beam as wide as a canoe. Every instinct in Thomas's body leaned toward it, drawn like a needle to true north. This room feels quiet, Naya said, hugging Cloud close to her chest. Thomas didn't answer. He was already moving toward the fireplace. He ran a gloved hand along the mantel's edge. Something about the proportion felt wrong. The beam jutted out more than it should have. He crouched and studied the join where stone met wood. There, a seam. A subtle indentation ran the length of the underside, nearly invisible, but not to a man who'd worked with wood his whole life. He tapped it lightly, listening for hollowness, listening for movement. Nothing. He turned his attention to the stone surround. It wasn't just decorative. The stones were arranged with precision, almost like a pattern. And near the left side, 3 feet from the hearth, he saw something he hadn't expected. Marks. tiny symbols carved into the surface, almost erased by time but not quite. "Naya," he said, "come here. What do you see on that rock?" She leaned close, her breath catching. "That's a drawing." "What kind of drawing?" She squinted. "It looks like a spiral." There was another stone 2 feet to the right, a triangle etched into it, then another slightly above with a dot in its center. Thomas stepped back. He'd seen something like this before a restoration project years ago in Santa Fe, a hidden compartment that used carved stone triggers. It had taken an archaeologist and 2 weeks to crack the code. But something about this felt intuitive, almost intentional. His pulse quickened. He ran his fingers over the first spiral, cold, silent. Then he pressed it. Nothing. He moved to the triangle. Click. Naya flinched. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, heart pounding. He pressed the third. Click. Stone on stone. A grinding groan rolled through the hearth. Then, unbelievably, part of the wall shifted. A vertical seam in the rock split, revealing a narrow gap, dark and still and deep. Thomas stepped back, shielding Naya with one arm. He reached for the flashlight in his jacket and aimed it into the opening. The beam cut into the darkness and struck metal, stacked rows of it, and gold, and something else. A small envelope sitting atop a wooden crate yellowed with time. "To whoever finds this," Thomas's breath froze in his chest. Dad, Naya whispered, clinging to his coat. "What is it?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. But deep down he knew this wasn't a home. It was a secret buried in timber and time, and he'd just cracked it open. Tomas unfolded the brittle letter with hands that didn't feel like his own. The paper crackled like dead leaves. The ink was faded but legible, the cursive bold and slanted, written by a man who once had nothing to fear. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and what I did cannot be undone." His stomach clenched. The air in the vault was dry, heavy with the smell of old wood and metal. Gold bars, real gold, sat neatly stacked on crates. Beside them, wads of aged currency were bound with faded Federal Reserve straps. Several oil paintings lined the walls, their canvases protected with cloth, and thick plastic signatures in corners that bore names he recognized from museum visits, not real life. Naya stood behind him, quiet, wide-eyed, her small hand gripping the back of his coat. Cloud was cradled in her arms, his soft ears twitching at every creak of the lodge. Tomas read aloud, voice steady, despite the hammering in his chest. "I was Marcus Whitfield, but by the end I didn't know that name anymore. I knew shame. I knew regret. And I knew fear. What I've left behind isn't mine. It was never mine." Thomas stopped, swallowed. He could feel the weight of every sentence press against his spine. He kept reading. "This fortune came from pensions I stole from workers who trusted me, from families who counted on it to survive. I buried it here because I couldn't face them. I couldn't return what I took. But maybe someone else can." The final line chilled him. "Please do what I couldn't. Make it right. Or destroy it." Thomas folded the letter, eyes burning. He stood in the silence of the vault, heart hammering so loud he was sure Naya could hear it. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "is it real?" He nodded slowly, lips pressed in a line. "It's real. All of it." He turned back toward the stacked gold, every last cent. The weight of what he'd found settled like a stone in his chest. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a saint either. But this was a fork in the road, one that could change everything or ruin everything. He gathered the letter and tucked it carefully into his coat. Then he took Naya's hand and led her out of the vault, sealing the stone back in place with a faint click of the hidden mechanism. Back in the great room, the light through the windows had dimmed. Snow was falling thicker now. A storm was rolling in, and the wind had begun to moan through the cracks in the walls. They set up camp near the hearth, using the propane heater sparingly. Tomas unpacked peanut butter sandwiches and apples. Naya ate quietly, staring into the fireless hearth. "When will we go back?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "before the snow gets worse." She hesitated. "Will we tell anyone?" Thomas stared into the shadows. "We'll have to, but not yet. I need to think." And he did, all night. He sat awake after Naya fell asleep in her sleeping bag, Cloud curled up against her hip. Thomas stared out one of the tall windows into the night lit by moonlight on fresh snow. He thought about what Marcus Whitfield had done, and what it meant to be the man who'd found it. He could vanish. Leave the past behind. Never work another back-breaking construction job again. He could get Naya new boots, a proper winter coat, even a home with hot water that didn't sputter. But he'd have to live with the weight of stolen money, blood money, really. He shook his head. His father, a Navajo carpenter from Shiprock, used to say, "If you build a house on lies, it'll never stand in the wind." Tomas wouldn't build that kind of house. By first light, the snow had softened and stilled. He packed their things and loaded the truck. The lodge stood behind them like a silent witness, holding its secrets for just one more day. They made it down the trail, slowly stopping once to dig the truck out with a shovel he kept in the back. When they reached the first sign of cell service, Thomas pulled over. He texted his cousin Lita in Ignacio. "Need advice. Big situation." "Can you meet today?" she replied immediately. "Coffee house by the station. Noon. Don't be late." Tomas glanced at Naya in the rearview mirror, her head resting against Cloud's side. They had a long road ahead. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and coffee grounds. Lita was already there when they arrived, wearing a denim jacket lined with shearling and hoop earrings that caught the light. Thomas sat across from her, voice low. "You remember that old lodge Whitfield's?" She raised an eyebrow. "The one you bought for $500? "Yeah. There's a vault inside." He watched her lean back, arms folding. A vault full of money, gold, art, and a letter. A confession. Marcus Whitfield stole millions, hid it, wrote everything down. Lita stared at him for a long time, her brown eyes narrowing. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I don't want it. But I also don't know who to trust. You can't go to just anybody," she said. "Not with that kind of money. Feds'll take it, then maybe vanish it. You need someone who'll keep it public, transparent, someone who won't get us killed." She pulled out her phone. "I know a federal attorney in Santa Fe. Old client. Clean reputation. Works on restitution cases for tribal and elder fraud. Let me make a call." Tomas nodded, grateful. But even as she dialed, he felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the sense that the weight of the gold was already attracting shadows. That feeling grew stronger when he got back to the truck. There was an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. No stamp, no address. He ripped it open. Inside, one photo. Naya standing in front of the lodge yesterday, taken from the tree line, and one line scrawled on the back. "That treasure isn't yours to handle. Leave it alone." Thomas gripped the photo, every nerve on fire. His first instinct was to run back into the cafe, show Lita, demand answers. But then he looked back at Naya, who was humming to herself in the back seat, swinging her boots. He slid the photo into his coat pocket and quietly started the truck. They needed to move fast, and now it wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about staying alive long enough to do it. Tomas's hands trembled as he spread the photo on the table between him and Lita. They sat in the back room of her bead shop, behind drawn curtains and locked doors. The photo caught Naya mid-step in front of the lodge, Cloud bounding behind her. It was crisp, Close. Too close. They were watching us. Thomas said, voice low but charged. From the trees. Lita stared at it with narrowed eyes. This ain't a warning. It's a leash. They're letting you know they've got eyes on her. On both of you. He rubbed his temple. We haven't told anyone but you. No one followed us. No one even knew we were up there. She reached for her burner phone. Whoever it is, they knew about the lodge before you bought it. They just didn't think someone would actually go poking around on Christmas morning. Thomas looked up. Then why wait until now to threaten me? Lita shrugged. Maybe you tripped something. Maybe they didn't expect you to find the vault so fast. Or maybe they've been waiting for someone to open it for them. He stared at her. They didn't want to risk breaking in. You walk in, figure out the mechanism, do the hard part, and now they're watching, waiting to swoop. He leaned back cold, despite the heater buzzing behind him. What do I do? He asked, voice tight. Lita looked at him with fire in her eyes. You take it to someone who's got enough teeth to bite back. She opened her address book and circled a name, Nico Reyes, U.S. Assistant Attorney, Santa Fe. Worked with me on that uranium land scam last year. Straight shooter. Hates corruption. I'll get you in. The room felt smaller. Thomas exhaled, tried to steady himself. But we do it soon, she added. Before whoever took that photo gets nervous. Thomas nodded. Tomorrow, I'll drive down at first light. That night he didn't sleep. He stayed up watching the door, the windows, every shadow that moved across the snow-covered yard. Naya slept with Cloud curled up beside her. The peace on her face only deepened his resolve. By dawn, he packed a bag, left a note with Lita for Naya, and headed to Santa Fe. The drive was long and winding, cutting through mesas and frozen arroyos, but his mind was sharper than the cold. He arrived at the Federal Building by noon. Nico Reyes met him in a conference room flanked by a young paralegal and a U.S. Marshal who stood just outside the door. Nico was broad-shouldered and lean in his 40s, hair buzzed tight. His handshake was firm. You're the guy with the Christmas ghost vault, Thomas offered a tight smile. That's one way to put it. Nico leaned forward. Start at the beginning. Don't leave anything out. Thomas spoke for nearly 40 minutes. He laid out everything: buying the lodge, finding the vault, the letter from Marcus Whitfield, the threats, the photo. When he finished, Nico's face was unreadable. He sat back in his chair, tapping a pen on the table. Marcus Whitfield was presumed dead in 2015. His case went cold. We knew there were missing funds, but no one could find where he stashed them. You just dropped the entire missing link in my lap. Thomas nodded. I didn't come here for headlines. I want this made right. I want the families repaid. I want my daughter safe. Nico's eyes softened. You did the right thing coming here. But now that you've done that, you and your daughter are walking evidence. And if someone wants that money for themselves, they'll come harder next time. He turned to the paralegal. Start the paperwork for witness protection, temporary custody measures for the girl, and secure transport to the lodge. Thomas stiffened. Wait. You want to go back? Nico met his eyes. We need to secure the vault, inventory everything. There's no safer way than with you present. Thomas exhaled slowly. When tonight? By dusk, Thomas was in a black SUV heading back north with 2 federal agents and Nico in the front seat. He stared out the window as the mesas turned to snowfields, his heart tight in his chest. When they reached the trailhead near the lodge, they unloaded quickly. Snow crunched under boots. The lodge stood dark, tall, and solemn beneath a starless sky. Inside, the air was cold and still. Tomas showed them the hidden fireplace latch, the clicking of gears echoing louder than he remembered. The vault opened with a groan. Nico stepped in first, flashlight sweeping over the gold, the art, the crates of bonds and banknotes. He let out a low whistle. This is history. He handed his phone to one of the agents. Photograph everything, itemize by crate. Tag it. No one moves anything until we have federal authority logged. Thomas stayed back, the letter from Marcus Whitfield still folded in his pocket. Suddenly, the lights in the main room flickered. All eyes turned. Outside headlights beamed across the snow. A black truck was coming fast down the trail that no one else was supposed to know about. Nico cursed. Seal the vault. Now. The agents scrambled, shoving the heavy door closed, just as the sound of tires crunching snow echoed outside. Tomas grabbed the radio. "We've got company." Nico and his men drew sidearms and ducked behind pillars, the dim light barely showing their shadows. Thomas moved toward the back stairwell, motioning silently. He knew a second exit, a service door that led out to the ridgeline. "Come on," he whispered. They slipped out the back just as the truck doors slammed. Voices shouted outside. Flashlights swept across the snow. Thomas led them through the trees, looping around behind the barn and ducking into the ravine. Breath puffed in clouds. Boots slipped on ice. Finally, they reached the trucks hidden behind a fallen pine. Nico turned to Thomas. "That was no coincidence," he said. "They knew we'd be here." Thomas nodded. "And they'll come again." Nico reached into his coat and handed Thomas a secured device. "This stays with you. No calls, no texts. Use this if you see anything. We'll keep your daughter safe, but you need to stay alive long enough to testify." Thomas closed his hand around the phone chest, pounding. He looked up at the dark silhouette of the lodge in the distance. Somewhere in that snow-drenched wilderness, someone was watching. And they weren't done. The scent of juniper smoke clung to the hem of Tomas's coat as he stood on the back porch of the safe house, staring out across the frozen Rio Arriba Valley. The agents had posted 2 men at the front and 1 at the drive. Naya was asleep inside, curled on a twin bed beneath a handmade quilt, Cloud tucked at her feet. They'd moved her from Lita's home to this secure location 2 days ago after the lodge breach. But Thomas hadn't slept since. He rubbed his face and watched his breath plume in the cold. "I'm not just scared they'll come for us," he muttered aloud, more to the darkness than himself. "I'm scared they already have." Behind him, a floorboard creaked. Nico stepped out quietly, coat collar turned up. "You've got good instincts, Thomas," he said. "And right now I'm trusting them more than the intel we've got." Thomas gave a small nod. They knew we were at the lodge. They knew what room we'd be in. That kind of timing doesn't come from watching. It comes from knowing. Nico crossed his arms. "We've started vetting the agents who were on site. Nothing solid yet, but I've already pulled Lita into protective custody too." A flash of guilt crossed Thomas's face. "She's got nothing to do with this. She just tried to help." Nico looked over. "She gave you the name that led to me. That alone makes her a target." Thomas clenched his fists. "We can't keep playing defense, we won't," Nico said. "But we need leverage." Thomas turned. "Then let's use what Whitfield left us." Back inside, he opened the satchel he'd brought from the lodge. The agents had photographed everything, but returned personal effects to him, among them a thick leather ledger filled with Marcus Whitfield's cramped handwriting. He opened to the bookmarked page and placed it under the table lamp. "These are names," Thomas said. "Dozens of them. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, some of them tied to politicians, sheriffs, even judges." He recorded everything. Nico's jaw tightened. This is enough to trigger a federal corruption probe. But I need a public move. A big one. Something that rattles the tree. Tomas's eyes narrowed. Then you need the vault open again. In the daylight, with cameras. You want to go back, Nico asked. Tomas nodded. But this time I'm not sneaking in. I want the world to see what Whitfield left behind. Nico stepped back. You're thinking bigger than I expected. Thomas's voice was steady. If they're going to come after us, I want them to do it in the open. Let the cameras catch the shadows. The plan came together fast. Nico pulled strings with a trusted journalist, Melinda Rivas, from the Santa Fe Tribune, a seasoned reporter with a sharp instinct for danger and a reputation for truth. She'd broken the mining water scandal in 2018 and wasn't afraid of names in high places. 2 mornings later, Thomas stood outside the lodge again, this time flanked by federal marshals and news crews. A drone hovered above, and cameras rolled as Nico stepped forward to speak. This location, long abandoned and forgotten, is now the center of one of the most significant financial recovery cases in New Mexico history, he said. Thanks to an anonymous tip, we have found evidence of embezzlement tied to the late Marcus Whitfield. Today, we begin the official inventory of recovered assets. Tomas stood back, coat collar up, eyes scanning the tree line. Naya was safe miles away with Lita under guard. But he still felt like a target. He opened the vault door again, this time in front of half a dozen lenses. The air was cold metallic, filled with the weight of history. One of the agents moved forward and cracked a crate open with a crowbar. Inside were stacks of sealed bond certificates, some dated back over 30 years. Melinda stepped closer, snapping photos. This is insane, she whispered. You realize this is going to set the entire political sector on fire? Thomas nodded. That's the idea. But before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed across the canyon. Gunfire. The crowd dropped, cameras falling. Agents scrambled. Thomas tackled Melinda to the snow as another shot rang out, splintering the wood beside them. Sniper, someone shouted. Nico drew his weapon, motioning to the drone operator. Get a visual on the ridge. The drone zipped higher, scanning. A dark figure ran along the crest too far to make out clearly, disappearing into the trees. Tomas sat up, snow stinging his face. They're not afraid anymore. Nico grabbed his shoulder. They were never afraid. Just careful. Now they're desperate. Back at the lodge, they secured the vault again. No one was hurt, but the message was clear: whoever wanted the fortune wasn't done fighting for it. Later that evening, while reviewing footage, Melinda approached Thomas quietly. There's something I didn't say earlier, she murmured. Before the first shot rang out, I saw a red light laser sight. It wasn't pointed at you. Thomas turned sharply. Then who? She hesitated. Nico. Thomas's mouth went dry. Why didn't you say something sooner? I wasn't sure. But now, I think someone's trying to shift the story. Maybe even frame the wrong people. Thomas's thoughts reeled. If Nico had been the target, it meant there were layers even he hadn't considered. Someone on the inside, close enough to federal investigations, trying to remove a key player quietly. That night, Thomas drove back to the safe house under heavy escort. Snow fell gently, covering the day's chaos. But he couldn't shake the new truth: the enemy wasn't just watching anymore. They were planning their next move, and it wasn't just about money. It was about who controlled the story. He entered the house, checked on Naya, and sat by her side holding her tiny hand. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The glow from the hallway light cast shadows on the wall. He whispered to himself, not even sure why. If they want a war, they've got one, but they'll have to go through every last truth to bury this. Out in the dark, the wind stirred again. Quiet, calculated, waiting. The cold of dawn hadn't lifted yet when Thomas found himself staring at the photo Melinda had emailed overnight. Grainy, blurry, but unmistakable. The rifle's laser in the still frame was aligned directly with Nico's chest. There was no question now. Someone within the operation wanted him gone. Thomas sat at the chipped wooden table, his coffee untouched. He could hear Naya's light breathing from the next room, the steady rhythm of her dreams still untouched by the world's cruelty. That quiet safety felt like a fragile illusion, now one he had to protect, by unraveling the very system that had promised them protection. "I can't do this halfway anymore," he muttered, forwarding the photo to Nico with a single line. "We need to talk. Alone." Later that morning, they met behind the old mission ruins on the outskirts of Chama. No agents, no surveillance, just the raw wind and brittle silence of northern New Mexico winter. Nico arrived wearing a black overcoat hat pulled low, the tension in his frame barely concealed. "You sure this wasn't digitally doctored?" he asked, eyes scanning the ridgeline out of habit. "It wasn't," Thomas said. "Melinda sent the original file. Your name's on the list too, Whitfield's ledger. You were never part of his operation, were you?" Nico exhaled slowly. "No, I was the one investigating it from the inside, and they know," Thomas said flatly. "They must." Nico's eyes hardened. The shooting wasn't a scare tactic. It was a hit. Clean, military-grade rifle. That's not street-level corruption we're dealing with anymore. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded note. "This was slid under my windshield last night. No prints, no signature, just a location and a time." Nico read it aloud. "Sagebrush Hill, dusk. Bring the ledger. I think it's Whitfield's second in command. Maybe the one he cut out of the money before hiding it away," Thomas said. Nico folded the note, jaw clenched. "You're not going alone." Thomas shook his head. "That's the problem. If I show up with law enforcement, they'll vanish. And the trail with them. I have to go in clean." Nico hesitated, then nodded. "I'll shadow you from a distance. No comms. You give a signal, I come in. No signal, I stay back." They parted without another word. Thomas drove back to the safe house, his thoughts rattling like loose glass in a storm. Naya met him at the door, still in her pajamas, cloud trailing behind her. "You're going out again?" she asked, voice small. "I have to sweet pea," he said, crouching to her level. "But I'll be back before the stars come out." Her fingers clutched his sleeve. "You promise?" He looked into her eyes, and something inside him faltered. "I promise." By dusk, the horizon burned orange behind the ridgelines, the light dying slow and cold. Sagebrush Hill was empty save for a rusted cattle gate and the ruins of a homestead long abandoned. Thomas parked a quarter-mile down and approached on foot, boots crunching frost. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, lean, wrapped in a long duster coat. "You brought it?" the man asked, voice gravel slick. Thomas held up a leather-bound copy of the ledger, one he'd duplicated from the original. "You first." The man stepped closer, revealing a pocked face and sun-scorched eyes. "I was Whitfield's quartermaster. Kept the papers clean. I know where the rest is." "Then why contact me?" Thomas asked. "Because I didn't sign up for murder. That shooting at the lodge, not part of the plan. That's someone else, someone new. They want the money, but they're burning everyone who touches it." Thomas's voice stayed low. "Who are they?" "A name you won't like hearing. Vincent Travers. Former Department of the Interior. Now a private consultant who launders land deeds through shell trusts. He's been after Whitfield's stash for a decade." Thomas felt his stomach knot. Travers had been on his radar during the first investigation, cleaned up too fast, left no trails. The man had friends in high places, dangerous ones. You have proof, Thomas asked. The man reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a flash drive. It's all here: emails, meeting logs, even a transaction to a judge in Santa Fe. Tomas took it carefully. Why help me? Because I'm next. And I know it. But if I'm going out, I want that bastard buried with me. Suddenly, headlights blinked on from the ridge. Multiple vehicles. Tomas swore and ducked low. You led them here, he hissed. I didn't, the man snapped. They must have followed you. Tires tore across gravel, black SUVs, no markings. Tomas bolted the flash drive clenched tight. Gunfire cracked behind him. The man screamed, cut short. A second shot whistled past Tomas's shoulder. He dove into the sagebrush, rolling down an embankment, biting back pain as thorns tore into his hands. He spotted Nico's silhouette at the tree line, rifle raised. Move, Nico shouted. Thomas scrambled to his feet and ran, ducking low, weaving between brush and rock. Behind him, engines roared, and bullets snapped through branches. One clipped his coat, another sparked off a boulder. They reached the cover of the trees just as the SUV doors slammed. Voices shouted commands in clipped military cadence. Nico grabbed Thomas and shoved him down a ravine, both of them sliding until they hit frozen mud. They're coordinating, Nico growled. Not freelancers. This is organized. Thomas caught his breath, the flash drive warm in his palm. I've got proof now. Then we've got to vanish, Nico said. This can't go to the agency. Too many leaks. We need someone off-grid. Thomas thought of Lita, of her nephew Ty, the backcountry EMT with old military ties, and a cabin no one knew about near the reservation boundary. I know where we can go, Thomas said. But we can't wait. They ran through the dark, the forest swallowing their noise. Every step forward felt like chasing something, just beyond reach, a truth hidden under a mountain of blood and silence. And still in Thomas's mind, one line kept repeating itself over and over like a vow. If they want war, then let them feel what it's like when a father has nothing left to lose. The storm broke over the mesa as Thomas and Nico reached the base of the western foothills. Ice-laced rain began falling in sheets, biting against their jackets. Behind them, the forest held only silence, no headlights, no shouts, no engines. But both men knew better than to trust quiet after a hunt. Nico kept glancing over his shoulder. You sure Ty's out here? He's got a solar repeater on the North Ridge. Lita said he'd be monitoring it all week for wildfire damage. And there's no one better with a busted shoulder and a missing past. The trail narrowed, winding into a cleft, carved by centuries of meltwater. The air smelled of wet stone and pinyon sap. Cloud soaked to his bones stayed close behind Thomas, the pup's whimpers muffled by the wind. By the time they saw the glint of tin roof tucked behind a rock outcrop, Thomas's legs were trembling. The cabin was little more than stacked timber and weathered tin, but its lantern light glowed through the slats like a welcome fire in the dark. Thomas banged on the door. Ty, it's Thomas, and we need cover. A pause. Then the door creaked open. Ty Redhorse filled the frame, tall, rangy scars down his left cheek, and a gaze that measured risk like a sniper scope's wind. He stepped aside without a word. Inside, the heat from a cast-iron stove wrapped around them. Ty bolted the door behind them, then handed each a dry towel and gestured toward the hearth. A woman emerged from the back room, broad-shouldered, dressed in ranger's gear. Her face lit up in confusion, then recognition. Stormhorse, she asked. You're supposed to be retired, Thomas said. Yeah, I hear that a lot lately. Ty's voice was quiet, controlled. You bring the war to my door, cousin. I brought the truth. You still carry a spine under that patched-up flannel. Ty's eyes didn't flinch. What do you need? Thomas handed over the flash drive. Vincent Travers is behind Whitfield's operation, and he's wiping everyone tied to it. I've got a list of bank transfers, shell companies, judges, land grab contracts. I need it decrypted and copied before they find us again. Ty walked to a steel cabinet, pulled out a battered laptop and a portable inverter. This thing's old, but it doesn't ping satellites. You've got 5 minutes before it tries to handshake with anything. As he worked, the ranger woman sat beside Thomas. I'm Ava, she said. Ty's sister. I monitor drought patterns near Taos off-grid comms. What's Travers after exactly? Money first, power second. But I think he wants the land more than anything. The land the lodge sits on, the tribal acres around it, it's part of an old mineral survey. There's lithium under that basin. Eva's expression turned grim, so he launders land titles until no one remembers who owned what. Then he brings in federal contracts and drills it into dust. Thomas nodded. And he'll kill anyone in the way. Ty looked up. Drive's clean. I made 3 backups, but if they tracked you this far, you need to vanish again. Nico leaned forward. What about blowing this wide open? Not yet, Thomas said. We need to reach Melinda. She's got access to the Internal Affairs Board, but we can't call. We need a hand-delivered file. Ty stood. Then you'll take the old Smuggler's Road. East slope down through Rio Frio Canyon. No drones, no cell signal, but it'll get you within 2 miles of her office before sunrise. I'll go with him, Eva said. You'll need a uniform to pass the checkpoint. No, Thomas said. You stay here. If they find this place, someone needs to burn the rest. She looked at him, lips pressed. Then take Cloud. He follows you better than shadows. As midnight settled, they left the cabin, Cloud trotting close, the storm easing to sleet. Tomas clutched the waterproof satchel Ty had sealed around the drive and documents. They followed the canyon trail, moonlight casting silver light on frost-hardened pine. For hours they climbed and descended until the lights of Taos shimmered on the far horizon. Just as they reached the last switchback, Thomas paused. Something shifted in the silence, an unnatural echo. He pushed Nico behind a rock and dropped to his stomach. Cloud stiffened beside him, ears alert. A figure emerged on the trail above them, silhouetted against the ridge rifle slung low, radio clipped to the vest. Another agent, private contractor by the look of the gear. Clear the path, Thomas whispered. Now. They split, Thomas circling wide, Nico staying low. Cloud ran as bait, barking once before darting behind brush. The agent turned distracted, and Thomas tackled him from behind. They wrestled in the frost limbs, slamming into rocks. The man elbowed Thomas in the jaw, reached for his sidearm, but Nico struck him with a broken branch, knocking him out cold. Thomas breathed hard. They're already here. Nico searched the man's vest. Custom comms. Not traceable. These guys are ex-Black Ops. We're out of time. They pressed forward, leaving the agent zip-tied to a cedar. At the canyon's edge, Taos's outer roads sprawled in amber glow. Melinda's office was inside a secure records building near the university campus. They waited until first light before slipping into the maintenance entrance. Ava had prepared a ranger's badge and jacket for Thomas, enough to distract the sleepy guard. Inside, the halls smelled of dust and toner, everything humming with the buzz of fluorescents and early bird workers. Melinda met them near the archive room, her eyes widening as she saw the satchel. You brought it? She asked, locking the door behind them. Thomas handed it over. It's real. Everything we suspected. And worse. She flipped open the folder, scanning the flash drive, her face darkening. There's enough here to sink Travers and half the department. But if I file this through regular channels, it'll vanish. Thomas nodded. Then don't. Leak it. Send it to every free press outlet, state watchdog, and tribal sovereignty board in the region. Burn their whole house down." Melinda's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. "I'll need a few hours. You both need to disappear." As Thomas turned to leave, Melinda stopped him. "There's a message you need to hear. It came last night. A man named Travers left a voicemail for an unknown number. We intercepted it." She played the clip. A cold voice, unmistakable. "He still thinks it's about money, but he'll learn. You take a man's home, his land. You take his memory. That's how you kill a people." Thomas's jaw set. The old ache in his chest flared again, not pain, purpose. He met Melinda's gaze and said softly, "Then it's time he learned what memory can do when it fights back." Snow began to fall in slow spirals by the time Thomas and Nico reached the far edge of the Pueblo lands. The wind had quieted, but the cold was creeping in, bone deep. They'd left Melinda's office through a service tunnel, trusting her to begin the leaks. Now they crossed a sacred boundary land, not just owned, but remembered. The ridge above them bore the ancient petroglyphs of the Taos ancestors, and Thomas removed his hat in silence. Cloud trotted ahead, his breath steaming in the air. Nico limped slightly from the earlier fight, but didn't complain. They followed an unmarked trail toward the lodge, moving carefully, guided only by the faint line of boot tracks Eva had said she'd leave the day before. Each step forward felt like walking through two worlds, the living and the nearly lost. At the edge of a dry arroyo, they stopped. Below, set in a hollow ringed by juniper and frost-stung sage, the old lodge rose like a ghost. Snow powdered the roof. Smoke curled from the main chimney, but no lights burned in the windows. Thomas crouched beside a stone ledge. "You sure no one's here? I don't see any footprints besides ours," Nico said. "But it feels wrong. Too still." Tomas narrowed his eyes. "If they wanted to ambush us, they'd make it look empty." He reached into his coat and drew the revolver from his belt, the same one he hadn't touched since the day he left the Rangers. Nico checked his own weapon, then nodded. They moved in slow, keeping the building's eastern wall between them and the open plain. Tomas checked each window eyes, scanning for shadows or glints of glass. Inside, furniture lay covered in sheets. The hearth was cold. But something gnawed at him, an instinct honed by years in the field. Cloud stopped at the back door, sniffed once, then growled low. "Stay here," Thomas whispered. He moved forward, leaned into the frame, and gently pushed the door open. A click echoed a trap trigger. Tomas flung himself sideways as a shotgun blast tore through the doorway, splinters flying. He rolled and came up behind a barrel. Inside, boots scuffed wood, fast-moving. Two men burst out of the back hall, combat gear silencers, dead-eyed. Tomas fired twice, one shot winging a shoulder. Nico darted left, drawing their fire, ducking behind an old wagon frame. Tomas charged forward, slamming into one of them, driving him back into the wall. The second man swung his rifle, but Cloud leapt, teeth sinking into his arm. He screamed, staggered, and Tomas took him down with a brutal blow to the jaw. The house echoed with silence again. Nico limped into the hallway, blood on his jacket sleeve. "They're not guards. They're sweepers. Travers sent them to clean the site." Thomas moved quickly, searching the bodies. No ID tags. Just like the one in the canyon. In the den, he found a briefcase beneath the floorboards, a holdover from the lodge's former life. Inside, blueprints, maps, and a coded ledger. Property lines, mining permits, and correspondence between Travers and a private energy firm. "Everything we need," Thomas said. "But this time we keep it off servers." Nico reached for a notebook beside the fireplace. "Thomas, this is your handwriting." Thomas took it and turned to the first page. His own notes from years ago. The last operation before he vanished. Records of conversations with tribal council members, land inheritance agreements, survey reports. His hand trembled as he flipped through. "This is what I gave them to build the land registry," he whispered. "They used it to erase us instead." The realization felt like fire in his gut. He hadn't just failed to stop Travers. He had helped him. Outside, a faint whine rose in the distance. Drones. Not commercial ones, tactical. "We've got 10 minutes, maybe less," Nico said. "We're not running again," Thomas replied. "Not this time." He opened the old lodge safe behind a hidden panel revealing crates of documents, a long-barreled rifle wrapped in oiled cloth, and beneath it all a folded flag with the Stormhorse family crest embroidered in threadbare silk. Thomas knelt. "This land remembers us," he murmured, "and I'll be damned if I let it forget itself." The drone's shadow passed once overhead. Then again. Nico grabbed binoculars and scanned the hills. 3 SUVs coming from the west. Black. No plates. Thomas stood. "Then we make this ground holy again with truth." He handed Nico a satchel. "Take this to tie, through the dry ravine under the cottonwoods. You can make it before they close in. I'm not leaving you, you will. Because I don't need saving. I need someone left standing when this is done." Nico stared at him, jaw tight, but then nodded, took the satchel, and slipped out the back. Thomas moved through the lodge like a man reborn, lighting lanterns, uncovering family portraits, setting documents in open piles atop tables and desks. He threw open shutters, letting the snowfall drift in, letting the wind blow against the yellowed paper and ashwood walls. He took the rifle, last stood in the doorway of the central chamber, the fire lit once more behind him. 3 men stepped from the SUVs, flanked by 6 more in black gear. Travers was not among them, but his ghost might as well have been. The leader approached, bullhorn in hand. "Mr. Stormhorse, lay down your weapon. This property is under federal repossession." Thomas smiled faintly. "You ever try repossessing a soul son?" The man raised his hand. Thomas fired first. Gunfire erupted across the clearing. The old lodge shuddered with the noise, but Thomas stood his ground, defending not just a building, but every buried bone and forgotten name carved into this land. Bullets tore through windows. Thomas ducked behind the pillar, returning fire, hitting one in the shoulder. Smoke filled the room, but even as the battle raged, the lodge stood. Defiant, rooted, watching. And far down the ridge, Nico ran, carrying with him not just files and blueprints, but the last hope of memory. Back inside, Thomas reloaded, his fingers, bleeding jaw set hard. "This is our land," he whispered to no one and everyone, "and it remembers every name you tried to bury." Outside, another SUV was pulling up, this one different. Government plates. Emergency lights. Inside, Melinda. And behind her, 2 trucks full of federal monitors from Tribal Affairs and the Interior Corruption Watchdog. The tide was shifting, but Thomas didn't know that yet. He only knew the storm had finally come home. The gunfire had faded, leaving only the hiss of wind and the crackle of a fire that wouldn't die. Thomas crouched low beneath a shattered window pane, blood trickling from his temple. The smell of gunpowder still lingered thick as smoke, and for a moment, the silence felt like drowning. He scanned the tree line. The men in black were retreating, their SUVs, reversing out headlights blinking in the falling snow. Then he saw them, 2 government trucks roaring over the ridge, red and blue lights slicing through the whiteout. Melinda stepped out, first her coat flapping in the wind, a hand raised. Behind her came 2 agents in federal jackets, one bearing the seal of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the other from Interior Oversight. Tomas exhaled hard. "We're not ghosts anymore," he muttered. "They see us now." Melinda moved fast, ducking through the debris-littered doorway. "You alive?" she asked. "Barely." He pressed a hand to his ribs, but the lodge held. She looked around, her face pale but determined. The stories breaking everywhere. "Your brother Ty leaked the files. National news is running the land theft angle hard. Travers is being subpoenaed as we speak." Thomas sat back against the wall. "That's not going to stop him." "Not fully." Melinda's voice dropped low. "It's not just Travers anymore, there's someone higher. Defense contractors tied to the energy leases, black sites, hidden reserves under tribal lands. The feds are rattled. You've started something they can't bury." Tomas wiped the blood from his brow. "Then let's dig deeper." She nodded toward the hallway. "Where's the original ledger?" He rose, wincing. "Still hidden. But there's something else. Something worse." He led her down the corridor past the old bedrooms into the storage room where his father once kept harvest tools and winter skins. Thomas peeled back a rug and opened the floor hatch. Inside was the second vault, smaller, sealed in reinforced steel, untouched by time. "This wasn't Marcus's," Thomas said. "This was built before him. My grandfather's ledger says it held contracts, burial maps, tribal inheritance lines." Melinda's eyes widened. "That's your entire blood memory." "Exactly. If Travers got here first..." Melinda crouched. "Let's open it." Together they entered the code etched in the ledger's margin. A click. The vault door swung open with a groan like something exhaling from centuries past. Inside, folders upon folders marked with hand-inked names: blue corn, white elk, storm horse. Water rights, burial zones. Maps from 1872 signed under duress during a federal mediation. Proof not just of stolen land, but of the machinery that erased people. Melinda's hand trembled as she touched a letter dated 1921. "This is proof of relocation fraud. They never meant to return the land. They meant to hide the bodies." Thomas reached for a scroll, ancient and brittle. It bore his family crest and the signature of his great-grandfather. It granted protective title over sacred Winterland's land, now beneath the energy site Travers had sold last spring. "We bring this to court." Melinda said, "We don't just stop Travers. We unravel everything." Thomas nodded. "But we can't go through official channels. Not yet. Too many are compromised." She looked at him with cautious urgency. "Then we leak it, all of it." The wind outside picked up again. Tires crunched snow. Nico burst through the door with Ty on his heels. "Cameras," Nico said breathlessly. "Everywhere. Local reporters, tribal news, national outlets. They're climbing the ridge right now." Ty grinned. "We lit a fire no one can put out." Thomas looked out the window. Past the hills, dozens of people were coming. Not just journalists, but elders, farmers, veterans, waterkeepers. They carried banners with the old symbols. Flags Thomas hadn't seen flown in years. He turned to the others. "Let them in. Every single one." As the crowd gathered in front of the lodge, Melinda stepped up onto the porch with Thomas. She whispered, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Thomas took the scroll in one hand and raised it high. "The land remembers, and now so will the world." A hush fell over the gathered crowd. He spoke clearly, the wind carrying his voice. "This isn't just our history, it's your history too. Buried under concrete and stolen deeds. We have proof of theft, of silence, of betrayal. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded." Thomas laid the scroll open on a table. "We were never missing. You just weren't looking." Ty stepped beside him and unfurled another map, the one Melinda had recovered from Travers's private safe house. It showed overlapping mineral rights stolen from 5 sovereign tribes and auctioned off under false names. An elder stepped forward, a woman in a red wool shawl cane in hand, her eyes fierce and steady. "I remember this," she whispered. "My father told me about it before he died. Said the lodge was built on bones." She placed a hand on Thomas's arm. "You brought it back to light." That night the lodge burned with lantern glow and truth. Elders spoke. Youth sang in the old dialects. Journalists broadcast live feeds as documents were read aloud. In a quiet moment, Thomas pulled Nico aside. "They'll come again. With lawyers this time. With red tape and denials." Nico nodded, but not with silence. "We shattered that." Melinda joined them, her phone buzzing. International coverage just picked it up. Germany, Australia, Japan. Thomas looked out at the fire circle forming in front of the lodge. "All this time we thought we were forgotten," he said. "Turns out we were the ones holding the memory." Melinda's voice softened. "And memory is the first step toward justice." That night, Thomas didn't sleep. Instead, he sat beside the hearth with Iris curled in a blanket beside him, her breathing soft and peaceful. He stroked her hair. "You won't grow up wondering if we mattered," he whispered. "You'll know." Outside, the snow fell heavier, but it no longer felt like burial. It felt like blessing. Morning would come, and with it more questions, more threats. But for now, the truth had taken root, and truth once seen couldn't be unseen. The wind howled as the last car pulled away from the lodge. Thomas stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the figures disappearing through the snow. Journalists, tribal elders, youth leaders, all had left their voices still echoing in the halls. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they'd won. But then he saw it, an envelope slid under the door, stark against the pine wood floor. He crouched, heart suddenly tight, and picked it up. No name, no address. Just a stamp pressed into the paper, an eagle claw gripping a key, the insignia of a private security firm long rumored to operate in tribal territories, off the books, off the record. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a photograph of Iris walking to school, and a single line beneath it, "Everything has a price." He crushed the photo in his fist. They're still watching. Ty was already at his side, eyes wide. "We need to move. Now." Nico ran for the satellite phone. "Call Melinda. Tell her the wolves are circling." By nightfall, the lodge had become a fortress again. The firelight cast long shadows on the walls as Thomas sat at the table laying out the old tribal maps alongside the federal documents they'd recovered. Melinda's voice crackled through the phone. "The Bureau's backing out. Too much heat from the defense contractors. The agents we worked with are being reassigned quietly." "So we're alone," Thomas said, jaw clenched. "Not entirely," her voice dropped. "There's someone who might help, but she's not exactly official. Who her name's Rosa Carr, independent journalist, ex-NSA. She works with a coalition of watchdogs who expose off-grid government projects. She owes me. Is she clean as a whistle in a sandstorm? But she's ruthless. You want the truth out in a way no one can bury. She's your last shot." Thomas agreed. And hours later, Rosa arrived in a battered SUV with no plates and eyes that had seen too much. She shook Thomas's hand hard, her stare sharp as ice. "I've read the files. You're not just sitting on tribal history. You're sitting on a geopolitical bomb. Water rights, uranium, surveillance corridors. This wasn't just theft. This was occupation disguised as economics. We want the world to see it," Thomas said. "All of it." Rosa pulled out a military-grade hard drive. "Then let's blow the lid." They worked through the night, scanning, sorting, uploading. Rosa's fingers flew across her keyboard like a woman possessed. At 4:32 a.m., she turned the screen to Thomas. A secure web interface. A countdown. "We go live in 12 hours, she said. Every news agency, independent media outlet, whistleblower site, simultaneously. Thomas felt his chest tighten. That gives them 12 hours to silence us. Outside, the storm was rising again. By mid-morning, 2 black SUVs were spotted crawling up the icy trail. Nico grabbed the rifle. "They're not press." Tomas moved Iris into the back room with Auntie Lena and pulled the shutters tight. The others armed themselves with whatever they had, Nico's revolver, Ty's crossbow, even an old axe Thomas found by the woodpile. Rosa looked calm. "If they take me, finish the upload. Promise me." Thomas nodded. The SUVs stopped just short of the clearing. 2 men got out, suits, not mercenaries. But their posture was all threat. Thomas stepped onto the porch. "You're trespassing on sovereign land." The taller one smiled. "We're here to negotiate." "Like hell," Mr. Yazzie, the man said evenly. "This doesn't have to end in chaos. We're prepared to offer significant restitution. 7 figures. Cash. You walk away. The documents disappear." Tomas stared at him, disgust curling in his gut. "The land's not for sale. Neither is the truth." The man's smile vanished. "You'll regret that." As he turned back toward his vehicle, Thomas called out, "So will your grandchildren." The man froze but said nothing. The SUVs retreated. Inside, Rosa pressed the final key. 10 minutes. Thomas sat beside her, staring at the monitor. "They won't stop, even after this." "No," Rosa agreed. "But the difference is now the world will know. You've dragged the darkness into the light." When the clock struck 0, the files went live. Thomas watched it unfold in real-time notifications pinging, screens lighting up, headlines appearing: "Stolen sovereignty," "The lodge that told the truth," "Buried but not forgotten." Calls poured in, from tribal leaders, lawmakers, even international human rights groups. But with the attention came new threats. A drone circled the lodge once. A dead coyote was left at the doorstep. The lines had been drawn. Thomas gathered the others that evening. "We can't stay here forever. But we can't run either. They'll follow." Lena stepped forward. "Then we moved the fight. To courtrooms, to Washington, to every place they thought we'd never reach." Nico grinned. "Let's make them sorry they ever underestimated us." Thomas looked to Iris, who had drawn a picture of the lodge with fire in its windows and a sun breaking over the mountains. He smiled. "This isn't just about what they took. It's about what we're building." The lodge had once been a grave. Now it was a lighthouse, and the storm outside couldn't drown the fire burning within. The television flickered in the corner of the lodge's kitchen, its screen awash in breaking news banners and sharp-jawed anchors. Every major network now carried the story. Thomas watched as footage from Rosa's leak played grainy images of government memos, maps with crisscrossed pipelines, spreadsheets detailing embezzled tribal funds, surveillance corridors cutting through sovereign land without consent. The world was finally looking. But as the country reacted, some in horror, others in denial, the pressure on the small team inside the lodge mounted. Tomas hadn't slept more than an hour since the release. There was too much to monitor, too many threats to track. Rosa had gone silent the previous night after leaving to meet a contact in Santa Fe. Her phone had gone dead 2 hours later. And then there was the drone again. It came back before dawn, buzzing low, its dark shape circling over the lodge like a vulture. Ty stormed in with snow still on his shoulders. That thing's getting closer each time. Nico glanced up from the back table where he'd been poring over maps of the land boundaries. If they're not making a move yet, they're watching for someone else to make it first. They want us cornered, Thomas muttered. They want us tired, reactive. Lena poured hot coffee into thick mugs, and we won't give it to them. We're not prey. Not anymore. Thomas took his cup, his hands steady, despite the exhaustion weighing on him. We go on the offensive. Ty raised a brow. With what, we've got a few rifles, old maps, and the truth. That's it. That's more than they've ever had to face before, Thomas said. And we've got allies now. Indeed, their inboxes and encrypted messages were flooding with support journalists requesting interviews, attorneys offering pro bono representation, tribal leaders wanting to convene a council. But with each new wave of support came a new layer of risk. Someone had hacked into their backup server. Files were deleted, others corrupted. Rosa's contact in Santa Fe was found unconscious in her hotel room, poisoned, the hospital report said, but stable. Rosa was still missing. It was then that Thomas made the hardest call yet. We go public. Faces, names, all of it. No more shadows. If they come for us now, they come in full view of the world. Lena looked stunned. You're sure if they think we're afraid to show ourselves, they'll think we're afraid to fight back? Nico exhaled slowly. Let's show them we've got nothing to hide. That afternoon, Thomas sat on the lodge's front steps, Iris beside him, bundled in her thick red coat, her mittened hand wrapped in his. A camera crew from an independent tribal media outlet had driven through the storm. Their crew, mostly Diné and Apache journalists, worked quietly and respectfully, nodding to the land, offering words in their language before filming began. Tomas spoke first. My name is Tomas Yazi. I'm Diné. My daughter Iris and I came here last winter with nothing but hope and a desperate need for something better. What we found was not just a lodge buried in snow, but a truth buried under decades of silence. We found the ledger, the vault, the proof that this land, this people were stolen from and watched without consent. What we uncovered should have stayed buried if they had their way, but we're not letting it stay buried anymore. He paused and glanced at Iris. Her eyes held his steady. We're not just asking for justice. We're demanding it. And if they try to silence us, let the world know it wasn't because we lied. It's because we told the truth. The interview aired within the hour. Then it was clipped, shared, translated, and posted across every platform. The image of Tomas and Iris sitting on the snowy steps became a symbol shared by protesters, by veterans, by water protectors, and civil rights leaders across the country. Back inside the lodge, Ty was quiet. They won't let this stand. You know that, right? I'm counting on it, Thomas said. That night, the snow returned heavy and fast, coating the world in silence. But just after midnight, a sound broke through. A muffled bang. Nico sprang from the cot by the door. That wasn't the wind. Another bang, this time louder. The lodge shook slightly. Lena rushed Iris into the pantry. Ty crouched by the front window. They're trying to breach, he said. Smoke grenades. Tomas grabbed his father's old rifle, the one that hadn't fired in 20 years, but had been cleaned and oiled just last week. He peered out the side window and caught a glimpse of movement. Two figures, masked, dressed in black, not military, but trained. Everyone down, he shouted, as the third grenade shattered a window and rolled across the floor, hissing plumes of choking gray fog. Gunfire followed, controlled tight bursts meant to scare, not kill. Yet. Nico fired back, driving them to cover. Thomas helped Ty push a heavy table in front of the broken window. They want the drives. They want us gone. Then they'll have to step over our bodies, Ty growled. A spotlight suddenly pierced the lodge through the front window, blinding and cold. But then from beyond the trees came another sound. Engines. tires grinding in snow. A new set of headlights broke through the fog, and voices rang out. "This is tribal security. Drop your weapons and stand down." The attackers scattered, retreating into the trees. Seconds later, the door burst open, not with gunmen, but with officers wearing the insignia of the Jicarilla Apache and Navajo Nation. "You all right?" the lead officer asked. Tomas nodded, breathing hard. "Just in time. The council sent us. They're not letting you stand alone anymore." As dawn began to break, casting a pale gold over the snow-draped pines, Thomas stood outside the lodge, smoke still curling from the broken windows. Iris ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. He held her close, his voice steady as stone. "They came in the dark, but we held the line. And now the sun's rising." Smoke still hung in the rafters of the old lodge, curling like spirits through broken beams and bullet-riddled trim. The wood groaned under the weight of what had happened, what had been survived. Dawn poured through the eastern window, washing everything in pale gold. Thomas stood by the hearth, one hand on Iris's shoulder, the other steadying himself against the brick. Behind him, the tribal officers worked in silence, preserving evidence, guarding what remained. "The storm tried to bury us," Thomas whispered, "but we stood in it and bloomed anyway." Outside, the pines glittered with frost. The tracks of the attackers had long been covered by fresh snowfall, but their presence lingered. Thomas could feel it in the cold silence of the trees, in the wariness of his every breath. Ty stepped beside him, his arm in a makeshift sling, a graze from one of the attackers' bullets, wrapped tight with gauze. Council's calling a full investigation. They've pulled in national tribal media forensic teams, and they're filing injunctions against any federal interference. And Rosa Thomas asked, voice raw. "She made contact," Ty replied. "She's safe. She was holed up with a judge, one of the few she could trust. They were waiting until the broadcast to move. She'll be here by midday." Thomas nodded, the weight of it all pressing on him. He turned to Iris, brushing a lock of hair from her brow. "You okay, Hummingbird?" Iris looked up at him, her eyes sharp and ancient beyond her years. "They can't have our home right." "No," he said firmly. "They never could." Lena and Nico entered their clothes, still damp from scouting the ridge. Nico carried the drone they downed earlier, smashed to pieces, its internal memory card already sent out, with the tribal guards for deep recovery. Lena set her gear down, brushing melting snow from her coat. "Something you should see," she said, handing Tomas a rolled map. It wasn't paper, it was old hide tanned and drawn on with inks faded by time. Found it in a compartment under the hearth. Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Tomas unrolled it on the table. His breath caught. It was the original land grant, written in both English and Diné Bizaad, bearing signatures from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Tribal Council. But that wasn't all. There were notations in red ink circles around mineral deposits, arrows pointing to fault lines, and a small sketched box labeled Cache A, a second vault. They knew the fireplace wasn't the only one, Nico muttered. That first vault was a distraction, meant to give just enough to silence. Ty's eyes narrowed. "And we fell right into it." "No," Thomas said. "We used it to wake people up. But this is what they were really afraid of." The room fell silent as they took in the implications. The first vault had exposed the theft of tribal resources, but a second vault, possibly deeper, older, and unaccounted for, could contain treaties, proof of surveillance plans, or worse. Tomas closed the map slowly. "We don't tell anyone. Not yet. This time we move smart." Iris tugged his sleeve. "Can I still decorate the tree?" Everyone paused. Outside, the world was still dangerous, but inside the wood stove hummed and the kettle sang gently on the stovetop. Christmas had come and gone, but in a way it hadn't arrived yet for them. Thomas smiled. Yes, baby. Let's decorate it. Hours later, Rosa returned, stepping through the lodge doors, bundled in a thick red wool coat, her eyes rimmed with fatigue and triumph. Thomas met her with an embrace that said everything words couldn't. She handed him a flash drive. It's all here. Court documents, financials, surveillance logs, and one last thing, the original whistleblower file. From who he asked. She smiled faintly. Your mother. Thomas froze. His mother who died when he was just 15. The woman who once whispered to him that truth had roots deeper than fear. Rosa nodded. She worked for the Office of Land Management back in the 90s. She saw what they were starting to do, pushing for a project disguised as infrastructure aid. But it was a data sweep. Hidden towers camouflaged like forestry beacons. They tracked population movement conversations, even dreams passed in ceremony. And she tried to stop it. She did stop it briefly. Long enough to bury her notes where they'd be found when it mattered most. Tomas's throat tightened. He looked at the hearth, at the place where his daughter had danced in front of the fire, where his ancestors' voices seemed to linger in the crackle of embers. She knew it would be me, he whispered. That's why she wrote your name into the final letter. For Thomas, when the snow is deep and the firelight calls, tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't look away. The council convened within 3 days, not in the capital, not in some sterile office, but at the lodge itself. The snow was cleared, satellite teams arrived, and every chair around the long handmade table was filled with tribal leaders, legal experts, and elders. Thomas stood before them, Iris at his side. He read from the flash drive, showed the footage, presented the old map. Each revelation was met with silence, deep, weighty silence. And then the vote was called. Unanimous. The land rights would be re-evaluated. The lawsuit against the pipeline would be reopened. Federal grants were to be frozen pending criminal investigation into misappropriation. And the lodge, once abandoned, was declared a heritage site. Outside, dozens of people had gathered, holding candles, drumming softly in the snow. Supporters from nearby Pueblos, Apache communities, and even members of the Lakota and Ojibwe nations had come to stand in unity. Tomas stepped out onto the porch. He didn't speak right away. The silence carried its own music. Then he said, "They tried to make us ghosts, but we are not gone. We are still here. We are still fire." Applause rose, not loud and wild, but steady and reverent like a heartbeat. Later that night, the lodge was quiet again. Iris fell asleep by the fire, her small frame curled beneath the beaded quilt Lena had made. Ty dozed with his boots still on. Nico hummed softly as he carved a new walking stick from pine, and Rosa wrote notes in her journal. Thomas stepped outside. The stars were blindingly bright above the mountains. The wind was cold, but not cruel. He looked out at the land, his land now, but not in the sense of ownership, in the sense of belonging. He placed his hand on the old tree stump where he'd first sat on Christmas morning a year ago. The same stump where he'd cried and wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But now, as snow fell around him and the air shimmered with stillness, he whispered to the wind, "We were never alone." And this time the land answered. A single gust swept through the pines, rustling the branches in a rhythm as old as time. The educational lesson learned from this story is that truth once buried can become a seed. In the face of loss, isolation, and deep injustice, standing firm in your story, even when the world turns away, can bring about powerful change. Communities, when united, become unshakable. And home is not just where you arrive, it's what you choose to build even in the snow. The educational lesson learned from this story is that truth and integrity often reveal themselves later in life, when experience has taught us the value of standing firm rather than standing fast. Even when the odds feel overwhelming, doing what is right can protect not only our families, but the dignity of an entire community. The story reminds us that our roots, memories, and moral choices matter more than wealth or power. And sometimes the greatest legacy we leave is simply refusing to stay silent when something precious is at risk.